Hello. Thank you for those kind words, Deb. And for anyone who was here last week, I do not have a 2-year-old co-MC tonight. So I'm looking forward to being able to have uninterrupted talking when it's me talking to you and getting to listen to you. Speaking of, who was here last week? Can you give me a thumbs up or something in the chat so we can see? We have some people returning. Of course, some of you were the people who were not presenting and were our audience, and some of you were presenting, and congratulations. I hope those of you who were presenting have relaxed for the last 5 days while our other 3 women have been preparing for tonight. But I just want to share with everybody, especially I see there are a lot of people for whom this is your first time with us this year, that it feels to some extent like there were themes of these 2 nights. And I don't know if this was intentional. I've had an opportunity to speak to this group of 7 researchers once all together this year, and I loved hearing what I got to hear from them several months ago. But the first set of 4 teachers were sharing a lot of the classroom pedagogical practices that they were trying. And wonderful to hear about all of that. What I notice about our 3 presenters tonight, as I'm thinking about the research that you're sharing, is you're sharing some of those ways that you have gone kind of outside of, I don't want to say simply or just, because what we do as classroom practitioners is so incredibly important, but finding those ways to enrich and to augment what you are doing with all other resources. And so I'm really excited to get to hear from each of our presenters tonight about these enriching elements that you have brought into your classroom space, and looking for threads that may come up in those 3 presentations. So with that in mind, I would like to introduce our first presenter. She is going to be sharing with us information about how she has journeyed into creating a school library for her students. She is a teacher who has taught in 2 different countries, a huge amount of respect for that. I have Daniela Mladenovic.
You got it.
Thank you. Rufino Tamayo in the Acero School Network. So Daniela, take it away. Tell us about your work with libraries.
Okay, thank you so much for such a wonderful introduction, Kate. And I see a lot of people cheering here for me. There's my sister from Serbia who is actually staying till midnight. It's midnight there. There's my husband from somewhere on the road, and my wonderful library team and the parents, my nurse is here. So I want to thank everybody for being here and cheering me on. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen. Can you see my screen now?
If you can get rid of 2 more, I saw that you had 2 tabs that you had just closed. Can you close 2 more? We're down to just 1. There's 1 tab along the bottom of your screen. That's it.
1 tab on the bottom.
That's it. There was maybe
okay,
1.
That's it. So now it's okay. You can see it.
We can see most of your screen. There's just a little bit of a black bar at the bottom, but we can let you know if there's anything that makes it hard to read later.
Okay, sounds good. Let me try one more thing to get rid of it. Okay. How can I read when I don't have any books at home? In my ARLI research project this school year, I was exploring the impact of creating a school library on students and community. And my 2 sub questions were, how does struggling readers' reading engagement change? And then the second one, how does the community choose to be involved with the library? And oftentimes I felt like this dude here dragging that shelf and all those books this year has been a lot of work like that. So it was funny, a funny clip to me. A little bit about myself. I'm a reading specialist. I have been in the reading interventionist role for 12 years now, teaching students, struggling readers in grades K through 8. I have been an educator for 25 years. Been teaching in my home country of Serbia since 1998. And then I moved to the US in 2006. As you can hear from my voice and from my accent, I'm a first generation immigrant. My immigrant background and my lifelong love for reading, love for learning have impacted me as a teacher and as a person, and I bring that to my teaching every day. And so I feel that my mission is not only to teach my struggling readers to read, but to develop their love for reading. And I feel with my immigrant background that I inspire them with my story to make sure that they try their best to succeed and to really achieve their dreams. This is a little bit about my research project context. So my school, as Kate said, is Rufino Tamayo School. It's one of 15 Sierra schools, and it has a reputation of one of better performing schools. And the kids in my school are really amazing, well-disciplined, and it's a welcoming school. It's a well-managed school. It was open in 2005, and it services 288 students in grades K through 8, 98% of the students of Hispanic origin. My school is located in Gage Park, where there is primarily low socioeconomic status, and there is a high crime rate. Some parents work 2 jobs, or they work long hours. If one parent works long hours, then the mom usually stays at home to watch the kids. And so they don't really have the time to take the kids to the park, let alone to the public library. So the kids tell me that they pretty much stay indoors, and many of my kids haven't ever visited the public library we have in the neighborhood. So a little bit about the library creation process. Last school year was my first school year at Tamayo. So then I chatted with my students about their reading habits, if they like to read. And that's when one of my kids told me, "How can I read, teacher, when I don't have any books at home?" And so I decided to actually try to create a school library. My principal was hesitant at first because it's a huge project and it involves a lot. But then I kind of tried to start small, and I created a scholastic campaign where Judy Harris, I don't know if she's here, she gave me a huge amount of money. She donated that. Then I applied and I received CFE grants and got donors, choose donations, and it all amounted to around $14,000 that I've collected for these 2 years to create the school library. And from then on, and it was just a huge, it was like a really quick process. And my amazing library team who's there, and I, from November 22 to February 23, that was a really intense work. And the parents, some of them are here as well, we were working before and after school every day, and during school, it was really intense. But then in February 2022, February 22, this year, 23, we had a grand reveal. And so there were parents, and there was my team. So we cut the red ribbon and we opened the library. And so I'm really grateful to my team, to my leadership team, everybody who donated, got involved. It was a really arduous journey, but it's so rewarding. Back to my research project. This was my data collection process and tools. So for this school year, I started recording everything I did from September of last year to May this year. I sent out Google surveys to my students and I was asking them questions about their reading engagement. And the first was in November 22, when we kind of started talking about creating the library. The next one is in February, when we were almost done with the library. And then in May, once we had the library open, I started a reading initiative, reading logs initiative. First, it was with my groups, and then I started the school-wide initiative. I had a parent focus group of the most involved parents. There were 5 parents who helped me every day. And we met in March and we talked about it. And then I collected data from Follett Circulation System. It's a library system that we have in our school. My participants were 15 struggling readers in grades 3 to 6. So as I said, I'm a reading interventionist. And so the way my groups work, I pull small groups of students, and my groups are fluid. So that means that when my students increase their reading scores and they improve their growth, their reading growth improves, they leave my groups. Or if they receive IEPs, they also leave my groups. So in my groups, I had 7 students remain in my groups, and 8 students remained in my groups and 7 students left my groups. However, all of these students, all of these 15 students that I started with in November, they were all remained in my research group. So they all responded to the surveys and they all participated. Okay, so this is my data analysis and findings. So the first question I asked in my Google surveys, I asked them, how many days a week do you read books at home? And so in November, you can see that 4 students reported they never read books at home. Then that number decreased to 2. And then there was 0 in May. Nobody said they never read at home. And if you look at the green bar, in November, 4 students reported they read books at home, and 7 students reported that they read 5+ times at home. It's to me, that's a huge, really a huge improvement. And so I kind of looked at those students who read only 1 or 2 times a week, and it was interesting to me that I noticed that of those students, of those 6 students, 4 were not in my groups anymore, and the other 2 were 6th graders, of course. The next question I asked was, I asked them, how often do you talk about books with your friends? So if you, can you see this number? This is November in this chart. In November, 0 students reported they were talking about books with their friends. And then look, February and May, 7 and 6 students respectively reported they were talking about books every day. And then this number decreased. There are 5 students who never talked about books with their friends, and that number decreased in May. And here you can see Ms. Rogers when we were opening our library, and all the kids excited about that. My next research question was, how often do you exchange books with your friends? So here there was, I couldn't really find any trends here except this blue one that actually is showing a decrease. So I asked, I was wondering why that was, and this quote I got from Ms. Rogers explained that. So now we're teaching students to take care of their books, of their library. They know how much time it took for us to create the library, and so they are taking responsibility, they're being responsible, they're taking care of their books. So now they're not really exchanging books that often with friends. I was also looking at how many books they checked out from the Follett system, and it was about 50% each month. So each month there was about 50% of students. So it's 8 or 10 out of 15 checked out books each month. Here, as for reading logs, that wasn't really that successful. But I noticed that in March, I really put an emphasis on that only in my group. So 12 of my 15 students returned their reading logs, but that wasn't really as successful in April and May. But one of the students, if you can see this quote, she told me, "Don't worry so much about it, Ms. Daniela. I still like to read." And okay, it was hard for students to keep track of their reading logs. So, but that's a lesson for next school year. Another thing I looked at was I compared the students who remained in my reading groups with the students who exited my reading groups. And if you take a look here, this is at least, if they checked out at least one book a month. So I didn't really count if they checked out more. I focused that if they checked out at least one book per month. And so there I have my groups have 20 check marks. And these students who exited my groups, there's only 6. And so both of these the groups of students, they had access to the library and they went with their teachers to the library. The only difference was that in my groups, they could bring their library books and they could showcase their books. They could make recommendations or ask me if I wanted to read a little bit. That was their favorite thing, to give me their book and ask me to read a couple of pages. So that was that's a huge insight for me. I also, my second sub question was to research community involvement. And the first one was, the first one I focused on was the teacher involvement. And so the principal sent out a weekly email, and we said, Ms. Rogers helped me create this calendar. We sent out the calendar, and look at that. The teachers signed up right away. It was just amazing to see that interest that teachers showed. Or I organized a librarian visit, and the sign up was optional. And so look at this, all the slots were taken. So the teachers were almost as excited about the library as the kids were. So it was a huge community involvement in the school. The next thing I did, I was sending Google surveys to the parents, but that didn't really go that well. So I tried to get my struggling students' parents involved a little bit more. So I sent that to them, and that didn't really go well. As I said, I sent to all the parents of 288 students, and 18 parents responded. And 5 of those parents who said, yes, I will help, they were there every day to help. And you can see some of them right here. Then I met with those in March. I met with those parents, and look, if you see these quotes, you can tell how much the motivation to help, it stems from their value of reading, their value of education, and how much they love this project. And another one that I liked, it was easier getting the books here than going to the public library. And it's true, just you're there, you are getting the books. I organized the collaboration with the Gage Park librarian, and I got some really cool ideas from the parents to organize when they can come in and read a book with their child. And there are some staff quotes. I'll let you read the rest, but this one from my principal, I have to read it to you. I am overwhelmed with joy and somewhat in disbelief. In 10 years at this school, one thing I was sure we would never have was a school library. A quote from my principal. So the next one is from Mrs. Espinoza, who helped me so much with the library. And you can see some of these words: welcome, needed, celebrated, or this one, how the kids are excited. or this one. It's affected our overall school culture, and it really shows. And here are some responses from the students. You can see a lot of, I like it, I like it, I like it. And I am so glad you opened the library, but the one that speaks to me the most is this one. I like how you put scary books. You listen to students which books they wanted. You listen to everybody. So I really liked how the kids recognize that their voices have been heard and their voices have been valued. So they recognize that, and I think they got even more excited about the library. I, of course, along the way had some challenges and limitations, and the most challenging one was the amount of time I actually spent creating the school library with my team and the parents. The next challenge was lack of parent response. Or getting more parents. It was 5 parents who were involved all the time, but the other parents, they chose, when we had family events, they chose to come in and they browse books with their kids. So that was a different aspect of involvement there. They chose. And then getting students to keep consistent record of their reading, they were losing those reading logs. They kept saying, I lost mine, I don't know where. So that was a huge challenge and a lesson for next year. My policy recommendation on a teacher level, and as I already showed, this huge difference when the students had the consistent time to read and talk about the books, it really makes a difference. And any activities promoting reading for pleasure on the school or district level facilitate easy access to books. So the kids can actually, they can easily get to books. Community level collaboration, all stakeholders, everybody should be involved in that. And then students reading with their family members is a huge one. On a national level, I would recommend that all schools should they should read and staff the school libraries. I would promote community collaboration as well. And then I would promote book reading in the media. I see all the time other things being promoted, but books here and there. So I would recommend promoting book reading for pleasure. I have a couple of things. This is to my library before and after. And I would like to share with you the video when we were opening the school library. That's the last thing I'm going to share with you tonight. So turn up your volume and listen to the student excitement.
Daniela came to me a year plus ago and said, I want to start a library. I said, that's a great idea, but we can't do it. She said, I really want to do it. I said, no, thank you, we can't do it. And then she went out with a team of teachers and parents and student helpers, and she did it anyway. That's because Miss Daniela and her team wouldn't take no for an answer because they knew this was important. We are a school. We deserve to have a library. We're very excited to present our 5 ribbon cutters on the library team, introducing the very first of all time, Tamile Library.
Okay. Oh, sorry. My bad. I'm trying to stop sharing.
You have stopped.
I have. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And I appreciate you being here, taking the time to be here.
Thank you so much, Daniela. That is such an exciting thing to hear. I feel like as we go further and further into the tech world, especially as we sit here as a bunch of boxes on Zoom, it's that much more exciting to hear about people who are making these kinds of community spaces that are in person. As we head into the question and comment section of this evening, I do want to direct everybody to Sarah's Zoom chat that has a feedback form for Daniela. It is always really wonderful as a fellow, after putting this much work into a presentation, to be able to hear people's glows, hear people's questions, if they have any ideas or suggestions and feedback. It's very meaningful. So please grab that. You can complete it while we're doing this, or you can save it so that you can complete it later after you've had a chance to hear from everyone. So a first question that I have for you, it sounds like this was a huge project. What was surprising for you as you went through this process?
So I really did not expect that reading engagement to have this soaring line, that huge jump that I saw from November, that in my that I was showing graphs. So the first one in November that I sent out, and when I saw that the kids were not talking about the books, and then in February and May, so many kids reported they were talking about books. I mean, of course, I provided opportunities for that, but even without that, they were reporting they were talking about books during recess or lunch. So that was surprising to me. And it was and one other thing that was really surprising, because I allocated that time, I had that regular time for them to talk about books. They were checking out books a lot more often. So like that difference, the students who remained in my groups and the students who left my groups, that was a huge difference. I didn't really expect that.
Thank you. Another question is around like, what's next with this? With this kind of project, it clearly took a huge amount of activation energy and so much effort and community initiative. How are you planning on sustaining this kind of work next year at your school, and where do you want this to go in your school community?
So I already mentioned my amazing library team and my leadership team who have been supporting me so much. So we already have systems in place. We built that in these short 3 months. We built these systems in place. But one thing I would like to explore further is involving the parents. You see the parents, I think that was a huge gap there, because the parents with the parental involvement, just coming to the library and reading with their child, and that's something they expressed. So I would like to see that happening next school year, and I would really like to find some better way for keeping record of their reading, so yeah.
And that's something for people who are completing feedback forms. If you have an idea, if you're like, oh, I've seen how people have been able to keep track of this kind of thing before, that's where you might share an idea that Daniela could try out and use next year. I do like to make sure that people have a chance to share personally and not just through me. So I'm going to step back and see if anyone is interested in asking a question live.
Anybody?
Yeah, how many books do you have in your library?
How many books?
Yeah.
So right now, I forgot to say that. Thank you for that question, Carly. So right now we have 1,200 titles, but there were 961 books read. From March into May, 961 books read. Isn't that amazing?
Wait, and can you say the number of books
so we have? Okay, so right now we have 1,191 books.
Wow. Okay.
191 books. Then we
added jumped right into it.
Yes. But you know what? They did not read all the various. Probably Dogman has 30 reads per book, I would think. Very popular books.
Well, that's why student voice and choice is so important. The fact that you were hearing that when you see books that are getting read over and over and over, and then the ones that aren't, it tells you something.
Yeah.
We have a question. I think we're going to take one final question from Loretta Walton, who has a hand up. And Loretta, if you are having issues with audio or with unmuting, you can also put your question in the chat.
I'll call myself. Okay. I was asking you, where do you have your books located, and are you having problems with losing many of them, you know, getting destroyed or whatever?
So we're a very, very small school, and at first it was really hard finding a place for the library. So what we decided eventually to do is to locate our library on the school stage. So we have a stage and we added our shelves there. So that's where our library is. And the second question, yes, books do get lost, and the kids are really good about returning them, but it happens that they get lost. So yeah, that happens too. And you know what? I expected it. We all expected it. The kids are just getting they're just learning how to borrow books from the library, how to take care of them. And so we expected that. It's not a huge number, but it happens.
I thought that's where I saw them located, on the stage. And I also was wondering if you used, it used to be called Rochelle Lee, but now it's Boundless Books.
Say that again, Loretta, sorry.
It used to be called Rochelle Lee, but now it's called Boundless Books for, you know, that's another way of getting books and a grant that you can write.
Oh, can you write that in the feedback so I can, I don't forget that, please?
Okay.
Okay, I actually see it. All right, thank you for that suggestion. Appreciate it.
All right, let's give one more round of applause for Daniela and the 11,000. 1,100, 11,000. That's a magnitude of 10, so I need to be clear.
Yeah, it's 1,100.
1,100 is a ton of books.
We did not get to 11,000 yet, Kate. No.
That would have meant that they were each like $1.25, because $14,000, 1,100 books is amazing. I think that Daniela's work shows us the power of people, the power of collaboration, what you can do when you get a lot of people involved. And I see this work coming in our next presenters project as well. Elizabeth Zyer is at Mitchell Elementary, and she's going to be talking to us about her work with parents. Daniela talked about how that may be kind of the future of how she wants to extend further opportunities and conversations with parents about this. Elizabeth is going to be sharing about what she did this year, really focusing on parent discussion groups and family discussion groups to support socio-emotional learning in our students as we come into this post how we talk about COVID world. Take it away, Elizabeth.
Great, thank you, Kate. I'm gonna go ahead and try to share my screen. Let me know if I have any trouble. All right. Okay, so, oops, I'm sorry. So as Kate said, I'm Elizabeth Zyer, and I am the pre-K teacher at Mitchell Elementary School. I'll be presenting tonight on a new initiative I started at our school, in which I led a parent discussion group for parents of students in my class. I apologize in advance for my voice. I seem to always get sick a little bit at the end of the school year. So my body's trying to fight that right now. Just bear with me if it gets a little annoying. So like I said, I teach at Mitchell, which is a small pre-K to 8 school in Chicago's Westtown Ukrainian Village neighborhood. The school has historically served a predominantly Latinx community, including many students who are identified as being low income. However, more recently, the neighborhood's been gentrifying and many wealthier families have been moving in and enrolling their children. So we've seen a shift in our student population, especially in the lower grades. A little background on me. I grew up in the Chicago suburbs and I attended parochial schools when I was young. The school I attended for pre-K to 8th grade was a small school with a strong community. And as I reflect back on my own elementary experiences, I was very fortunate to view school as a warm place that was the social hub for both me and my family. I was also very fortunate to grow up in a family that greatly valued education. My mom was an early childhood educator, so she had a lot of knowledge about child development, and she also had peers she could talk with about that. Another important piece of context is that at the beginning of the year, I looked like this, and now I look like this. So it's been a very exciting year for our family as my husband and I prepare for our first child at the end of July. It's also made it a particularly interesting year for me to work with parents more and gain a better understanding of the thinking behind different parenting approaches people take. As a pre-K teacher, I get to work with 20 enthusiastic and creative kids every day. 4- and 5-year-olds experience rapid development in many areas, but in my opinion, the top priority in pre-K is on social emotional learning. This is many kids' first time forming close relationships with adults outside of their family, having friendships with peers, and learning to navigate interactions in a group setting. Another important piece of teaching this age group is working with families. As many students' first teacher, it's particularly important that I view families as genuine partners in their kids' education. I've always put a lot of effort into building those relationships, but I believe it's more important now than ever due to COVID. Obviously, COVID challenged families and teachers in ways we hadn't experienced before, and that's made it even more important for us to focus on supporting students' social emotional development and supporting one another while doing so. The students who are in my class this year were between the ages of 19 to 29 months old when Chicago's stay-at-home order was first announced in 2020. And while those of us who are kind of optimistic might have hoped that means they were not affected as much as older kids who were already in school, unfortunately, in my experience, that hasn't really been the case. COVID had a significant effect on young children, as a few quotes from researchers early on in the pandemic show. As part of my research this year, I kept a teacher journal about my class and how things were progressing. Right from the beginning, social emotional needs were something I noticed my students were struggling with. As you can see from some of my journal entries early in the year, researchers' predictions about COVID's impact seem to hold true in my class. Overall, students displayed higher emotional needs and also needed a higher level of support from teachers to participate in the daily classroom routines than what we observed prior to COVID. As I realized how much students were struggling, I started to think about the most effective ways I could support them. One thing I took into consideration was existing research about supporting children with emotional and behavioral challenges. What became clear is that interventions to support children, especially young children, are most effective when their families are involved. Even prior to the pandemic, as few as 25% of children with behavioral challenges received mental health treatment, and those who did begin treatment often dropped out at high rates. I wanted to share a few key takeaways from the research I read. The first is that it's important to make it as easy as possible for parents to attend, such as holding meetings in a familiar place nearby and asking parents to not commit more time than is truly necessary. The second takeaway from the research is that collaborative partnerships between teachers and parents have been linked with improved social emotional outcomes for kids. And finally, it's important to help parents build their support networks. Having such networks in place has been shown to decrease parents' own mental health difficulties, which is hugely important since parents' challenges with mental health have a negative effect on their children's well-being. This piece seems particularly important coming out of the isolation many people experienced during COVID. Given the enormous stress COVID placed on families of young children and the challenges we're now seeing with these students in schools, this year I studied the question, what happens when parents and teachers partner together in a formalized support group to foster students' social emotional development during a year of pre-K post-COVID? I started my process by gathering more information from parents in my class. I sent a letter home that explained the discussion group that I was starting, and I invited all the parents to join. Prior to the group, I surveyed all the families about a few things. First, I wanted to know what would make it possible for them to join, such as providing childcare and days and times that were best for each family. Then I also asked about how connected they felt to other adults in and out of our school community, which we'll look at a little more closely later on. The final thing I asked for their input on was what they would be interested in discussing in the group. And you can see there are a few topics that are clear favorites among the parents in my class. I also measured their parenting self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is one's belief in their ability to succeed in specific situations or accomplish a task. So parenting self-efficacy describes a parent's belief in their ability to perform the parenting role successfully. I had a parent from each family in the class complete the TOPS, which is a tool developed to measure a change in parents' self-efficacy after participating in a parenting program. The TOPS measures parenting self-efficacy across 8 different domains, and you can see the class averages for each domain here. Though the averages across the different areas look relatively high, there are a few domains where families seem to be feeling a bit more challenged. One of these areas is control, which focuses on parents' belief about their ability to control both their child's behavior and their own behavior, such as staying calm during difficult parenting moments. A few of the specific items that parents scored lowest in the control section were things like, my child will respond to the boundaries I put in place, I'm able to stay calm when my child is behaving badly, and I can't stop my child behaving badly. Another area where parents in my class scored a bit lower was pressures. This focuses on things like coping with other people's expectations of them and perceived pressures such as comparing themselves to other parents. The specific items in that area that scored lowest were things like, it's difficult to cope with other people's expectations of me as a parent, and I can say no to other people if I don't agree with them. Once I had all of that information from the parents, I used it to help me try to prioritize families who I thought could benefit the most from participating in a group like this. Here you can see a breakdown of how I prioritize the level of need for each child in my class. I categorize families as being either high or low priority or somewhere in between. This was based on the responses parents gave in surveys and also my own observations of students in class. So if a student was becoming really emotionally dysregulated every day at school, I would probably mark that family as red and needing a lot of support. Or if a child sometimes seemed to struggle a bit in school and I noticed that their parents said they didn't feel connected to anyone in their community, I would mark them as yellow and try to give them a little more priority as I scheduled my groups. Students and families who seem to be doing really well were in the low priority group. So in the fall, in my whole class, I had 5 families who I considered high priority, 4 who were mid-level, and 10 who were low priority. I used this information to prioritize the scheduling needs of families of students who I saw struggling more in the hopes that more of them would then be able to participate in the group. On the right, you can see the breakdown of the families who actually ended up joining the group. While not all the families I was most hoping to include were able to join, it is interesting to see that the percentages between the 2 charts are somewhat similar. And in general, I was able to include a relatively high percentage of the families who I thought would benefit from additional support. As you can see, we had parents from 7 families join the group, which is about 37% of the class. Once the group got started, we met over 5 different sessions every 3 weeks in February to May. Each session had a different topic that we focused on, though we also took time to talk about anything that was on someone's mind, so parents had the space to vent, get feedback, and build relationships with one another each time too. During each group, we loosely followed the same general structure. First, we would do introductions and check in about how parents were doing and anything that had come up with their children from the last time we'd met. Then I would introduce the topic for the night and give out some handouts with information. Then we'd have a whole group discussion, which usually took up the bulk of the time during our meetings. And then we would wrap up for that topic, and I would introduce the next session's topic so people kind of knew what to be thinking about, and they could send me messages if there was anything in particular that was on their mind or that they wanted to make sure was addressed. I coded the transcripts from each parent group meeting, and while I coded for many different themes, I pulled out the ones that I thought were most interesting to share here. In general, it seems like over time, people felt increasingly comfortable sharing and opening up, and this led to more interesting and meaningful conversations as the week progressed. I think it's also interesting to note that different topics created an environment for different types of conversation, as you can see from the fact that parents talked about their own feelings so much more when we discussed emotion regulation in week 3. After the final session of our parent group, I again collected data to try to evaluate what impact the group had on those who participated. I had parents from every family in the class take the tops again, and this time I was able to find the averages for the parents who participated in the parent group and the averages for the parents who did not participate and compare those two. This graph looks a little bit complicated at first, but if you find the 0 line, that represents no change in the scores from the fall to the spring. So bars above the 0 line would show positive change, and bars below the line show a negative change in scores between the 2 times. As you can see, the non-participants ended up showing positive changes in their scores in more areas than the parents who did participate in the group with me. Initially, that felt pretty disappointing to see that the parents who participated in the discussion group scored themselves worse in many categories. But when you examine it a little more closely, it does start to make some sense. The domains where the parent group participants reported a more positive score in the spring compared to the parents who did not participate were in pressures and self-acceptance. The changes in these 2 domains seem to indicate that parents who participated in the group now have a better ability to cope with other people's expectations of them, and they feel more secure in their own parenting compared to the parents who did not participate. The other domains where the parent group participants scored themselves worse or about the same as the parents who did not participate deal more with specific parenting skills. This leads me to wonder whether people's sense of self-efficacy could be lower in the short term after they gain more knowledge and become more aware of areas where they could potentially improve. It seems once you learn a little, you realize there's always more to learn and you can always be improving. Interestingly, I sent an end of the year questionnaire to parents from the entire class. And when I got that back from parents, 100% of the parents who were in the group with me said they made changes in their parenting this year. And only 2/3 of parents who did not participate said they made any changes. So I do think there's a good chance that the parents who participated are starting to be more reflective and intentional with their parenting choices, but an increase in self-efficacy in the domains that focus on the specific skills is not apparent yet on a measure like this. In the spring, I also asked all of the parents in the class to again rate how connected they felt to others in the Mitchell community, so I could look at how that changed over the course of the school year. Those who participated in the group showed a much bigger increase in their connectedness to both other parents in the class as well as the teachers. It's hard to say whether that could partly be due to the fact that the parents who joined the group felt less connected to both teachers and other parents to begin with. Either way, I do think it's important to see that when we set aside time to really nurture those relationships, we can help parents build their support network, which we know from the research benefits kids' social emotional development. I also rated my own feelings of connectedness to each family in November and then again in May. Here we can see that there was not much difference between the 2 groups in the fall. My connection to both groups increased over the course of the year, which makes sense since I talk to caregivers briefly every day when they pick up their kids. But having the uninterrupted time with the parents who participated in the group clearly increased my own feelings of connection to them compared to the people who did not participate. In addition to completing the surveys I sent to the whole class in the spring, I sent one that was just for those who participated in the discussion group. In open-ended survey questions about what they liked best about the parent meetings and what they found most helpful, parents enjoyed connecting with each other best, but they found it most helpful to learn new information and tools. Discovering common struggles was also very meaningful to the parents who participated. I'm going to show you some direct quotes from parents about their reflections on the group experience. Some main themes they brought up include sharing more about their parenting than they normally do with friends and family, normalizing the struggles they're facing and feeling better about their own parenting, and building relationships with the teacher and parents from the class, and then also increased confidence in their parenting and tools that they can use. I'll give you a minute to read through some of these. This project also had an impact on me, which has been nice to reflect on a bit. I had a better understanding of my students when their parents participated in the group. And this looked a little different for different kids and contexts, but the examples kind of ranged from having a student who was pretty clingy and would sometimes, be hard for me to have a lot of empathy towards at the beginning of the year. But then as I understood better their family situation, because one of her parents was in the group, I knew that she had a brother at home who was struggling with a lot of behavioral challenges, and he would sometimes lash out at her. So it's easier for me to be empathetic towards her in the moment at school. And then even small things like connecting with a student whose mom was in the group, letting him know that I heard he and his sister had been watching Full House together and that I loved that show when I was a kid. So it was fun to get to know the kids on a different level a little bit too through their parents. Working with parents and strengthening relationships with them was also really energizing for me during a challenging year. I think everyone, including teachers, is still struggling with some level of burnout and the repercussions of isolation thanks to COVID. So being able to reconnect with families this year meant a lot to me. And while it took some extra work to prepare for each of our meetings, I genuinely looked forward to each of them and walked away feeling invigorated each time. And on a personal level, it was an opportunity for me to reflect on what I want my own parenting style to look like. And it helped me think about how important it is to have a strong community that I can open up to about parenting questions and struggles and wins. I have a few recommendations that the parents in the group shared for if we were to do a similar group in the future. One is that we should meet more frequently over the course of the entire school year. Consider reading a book as a group. Not everyone felt that way. I think some people like not having homework, but some people really love this option. And then also creating opportunities like this for parents at other grade levels came up quite a bit. And then they also included some topics to include in the future. Sibling comparisons and challenges came up quite a bit. That was also a pretty big theme in our discussions as we met. Different parenting styles between parenting partners was another big one. And then different styles and expectations between home and school was one that they mentioned as well. In terms of my recommendations moving forward, I think it's important to continue researching parenting programs, especially right now when we can see that kids and families are struggling post-COVID. In particular, we should continue to try to understand how we can solve some of the issues around access. As I said earlier, many families who need extra support aren't able to get it, either because mental health professionals don't have the availability, or it's too inconvenient or intimidating for families to join groups. And we need to keep working to provide supports that actually work for families. I also think longitudinal studies that help us understand the impact of groups like this over time would be valuable. I was originally hoping to see changes in students' behavior at school if they had a parent participate in this group. Unfortunately, there wasn't a noticeable difference in this area, but it's possible that changes like that would just take longer to observe. I also wonder if we would see more positive changes in parents' self-efficacy scores after a longer period of time too. And then I think we need to dig into exactly what drives positive change in these types of groups. Some wonderings I had after completing the research are things like, is it most effective when it's led by a classroom teacher with parents who are all from the same class? Or could a counselor or social worker lead a group? And could the groups be set up for families across different grade levels? There are some pre-K programs that have groups like this that focus on parenting, but they aren't often led by classroom teachers. It would also be interesting to look into what different topics seem most important to address and what format seems to work best. Some programs with similar goals include homework, but I didn't want to take that approach because I didn't want parents to feel like there was any sort of burden to participating. But it would be interesting to better understand what those types of trade-offs look like. One thing that was clear from listening to parents in the group is that people give a lot of advice, and there are lots of support options out there for parents of infants, but then the level of information sharing and support drops off drastically, and parents seem to feel a lot more isolated the older their kids get. At a school and district level, this probably goes without saying, but I think building community and supporting families is something many schools are constantly working on. One thing this process helped me realize is that it's especially important to try to identify families who might need a little extra encouragement to get involved and find ways to be more intentional about drawing them into the community. At a district level, I think it's important to educate principals on ways they can be more effective in how they use teachers' paid time. For example, in CPS, we have flex hours that can be used in different ways throughout the school year. And at Mitchell, we've started using those for things like having additional mid-year conferences for students who are struggling and other community building events with families. And I think that's been really important for us and a good use of our time. Having administrators who prioritize this type of work and are supportive of teachers trying new things is so important. I'm extremely fortunate to have supportive administrators, and that made a huge difference for me as I implemented this group and carried out this research project this year. For each of our meetings, my principal agreed to pay an extra staff member to provide childcare to make it easier for parents to attend. She also ordered a book that I could give each parent participant, which they really appreciated, and I think sent a signal to them that we as a school valued their participation in the group. One obvious thing that can be done is to fund projects like this in the future. In the long run, this is probably more cost effective than having children and families struggling with emotional and behavioral challenges try to access help from mental health professionals, when programs like this that build community and provide some level of support might be enough of a boost to help many of the families and children who are struggling. With COVID relief funds drying up, districts might have to get creative with applying for outside grants and using things like those flex hours to make this happen. And that is it for me. I wanted to thank everybody for being here, and a special thank you, especially to Deb, for all of her support and mentorship throughout this process.
Feel free to unmute if you want, Elizabeth, to be able to hear your applause. That was so cool to hear. Thank you especially for sharing so much of your personal context. I know that you're asking other families to be vulnerable over the course of those sessions. And so thank you for also sharing your vulnerability and your space in that. Sarah has just shared with us a feedback form for Elizabeth. So please give her some glows, some ideas, just like we were doing for Daniela. If you have things that you're like, ooh, you should consider, the feedback form is a great place for her to aggregate all of that and be able to get to it. A first question from the audience was around the participants in your group. What was the what were the demographics of families that were participating? How did that compare to the overall demographics of your class? And do you have any thoughts about how that might have impacted how they were engaging in this process with you?
I do think overall, the parents who ended up being able to join the group and participate with us did tend to be more of our white parents who I think are financially a little bit better off and might have a little bit more capacity to participate in extra things outside of work and school, and also who lived near Mitchell. I found that to be a big barrier for certain families if they live far away. I do think it was harder for them to make it to meetings, and I think that made it harder for them to sign up. I forgot what the second part of your question was, how that affected the group.
Yeah, do you have any thoughts about how the ways in which they may have engaged with you and with the group, and the experience of that group may have been impacted by the comparative demographics?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think it's possible that it made it on some level easier for some parents to be more vulnerable if they walked into a room and saw people who looked a little bit more like themselves rather than putting themselves out there in a group that was more diverse. Maybe that built community a little more quickly. I also think in some instances, people kind of joined with somebody they already had some connection to. So We have two families who are from Ukraine. The two moms joined together and they would like carpool together to the meetings and things like that. And so I think having a buddy made it a little bit easier to enter into a group like that at the beginning. But I'm not sure. It would be interesting. There are a few questions now, of course, after I've already sent all my many surveys that probably drove everyone nuts. Now I have like 10 other questions I wish I could ask them, but maybe next time.
Or you can grab a coffee with a parent over the summer and do an impromptu focus group.
Yeah.
Did you have any moments in these sessions where like you found yourself at a loss as the person who is facilitating this group and this experience, people who are adults and not pre-K children?
Yeah, I do think that was a big opportunity for me to grow professionally. I have not typically been comfortable leading groups with adults. So I was pushing myself a little bit out of my comfort zone with this. I think what seemed to challenge me most was when people talked about challenges with their older kids who I didn't teach and whose development I don't understand quite as well as I do when it comes to 4 and 5-year-olds. And so trying to give support and feedback around things like that was a little more challenging for me. So I do think when parents were saying it would be great to have groups like this for other grade levels and other age groups, I do think that would be really valuable, and they might get more out of it if they were facilitated by someone who has a stronger background in development at those ages. But yeah, that was, I think, the hardest thing for me in those moments.
Thank you. Thank you for that insight. I want to step back and see if there's anyone who would like to voice their question or comment into the group.
I have a question. I'm wondering, did you ever, did the school counselor ever engage with this process, or the social worker?
You know, this year, no, that didn't happen. I did sometimes when I was preparing for the groups, if there were topics where I was kind of trying to figure out how I should frame things or what would be most valuable to put on a handout, I would run things by some of them, especially the social worker would sit and be kind of a thought partner with me sometimes as I was preparing for the topics. But in terms of actually facilitating the groups, for this time, it was just me. But I do think that would be really interesting down the road to see either like teachers and counselors or social workers collaborating together to lead the group, or taking turns, or, you know, facilitating the groups in different ways would be interesting.
And our final question / comment for Elizabeth will be from Sue, who needs to unmute because Zoom is fun like that.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Elizabeth, I was looking at that survey where you got the slightly disappointing results, and I was thinking maybe, I mean, just another way to look at it would be that the parents that worked with you were a lot more honest, and therefore could admit their feelings of inadequacy. And I think often that's very, very hard for parents. So the very high scores on the non-participants tends, I think, perhaps to reflect their inability to be completely honest with you. And the lower scores are their honesty. That's all.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way of looking at it too. I appreciate you bringing that up. Thank you, Sue.
We don't want to follow Sue. So trying to give Elizabeth another round of applause. And thank you so much. I think that Carly was preparing us for a segue with her question about counselors, because our final presenter of the evening is a school counselor who thinks about, I assume, partnering with teachers routinely and partnering very closely with students, but not in the same kind of in-class capacity that a lot of us who are classroom teachers might be thinking about. So Carly Day is at Jonathan Burr Elementary, and she's going to be sharing perhaps in some ways the most like classroom teacher sounding presentation of the evening, thinking about story writing and how a story writing elective can be supportive of students. And I'm really interested to hear, because both you and Elizabeth mentioned just in your abstracts, the connection to the last 3 years and how do we support students. So we've heard, how do we support families to support students? And now it sounds like, how are we going to support students in building this community and this ability to support their social emotional learning. So without further ado, last but certainly not least, Carly Day.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kate. And I feel like I'm following 2 really wonderful presentations, and actually really 6 really wonderful presentations. And I just thank everyone for attending them, because it's been, I think you can hear how meaningful these projects have been to all of us. So with that being said, I'm going to dive into mine. Is my screen good? Yeah, you can see comics and counseling. Okay, so let's dive in. My name is Carly Day, and a little bit about me. I grew up on a 92-acre farm. My parents are here supporting me tonight, and so are other members of my family, but grew up in the 92-acre farm, same one my dad grew up on, and in a primarily white community. And then through my experiences in this town and on the farm, I just had this like belief that hard work could get you access to any opportunity you wanted. You just had to work hard for it. Fast forward to becoming a school counselor in Detroit with a primarily Hispanic population and a significant number of undocumented students. I was challenged very professionally. How do I support these students, but also personally? And I had a student that did have to make, actually I had several students that had to make hard choices. Do I go to school, or do I go take this under the table job so that I can have the money to pay for my immigration lawyer, so I can kind of clear some obstacles out of my path and move forward with college and job applications. And so professionally, I'm like, how do I support these students? But then personally, I also started realizing that maybe hard work wasn't the great equalizer that I thought it was, as I was watching these students have to work twice as hard to graduate from high school as I did. And that's just been kind of my experience with urban education, is challenging myself professionally, but then also growing personally as I take in my students' stories and experiences. Which brings me to now I'm in Chicago, and I live and work in Wicker Park. I do not have time to tell the whole story of Wicker Park, but it is a gentrified neighborhood. And that started around the 1990s, but a bunch of families that had been here for a long time, they saw the writing on the wall and they said, no, we don't want to get pushed out. And so they were very vocal about the challenges that came with gentrification. I post this picture up of the MTV, a reality show. You can actually Google that article. It's an interesting perspective of gentrification when the real world came to Chicago. But there were some protests where the residents just increased their vocalizations around the challenges. Gentrification, it did not stop gentrification, but it did kind of pave a way for people to stay in the neighborhood. And that's why in Wicker Park, you can see so many $1 million homes next to single family homes. And we still have, still maintain some of those people that had come into the neighborhood in the 1960s. And which brings me to my school, Jonathan Burr Elementary, which is right at Wicker Park and Bucktown. And we are a neighborhood school. And so we take in a lot of students from the neighborhood. And I think that's important to understand, because we do have students that have lived in these $1 million homes, but we also have a ton of students that their family has been in a home for a long time. And then additionally, we take in a pretty significant amount of students through a lottery program, because we're a magnet, what's called a magnet school, which just basically means people can apply to our school regardless of where they live in Chicago. And they do, and then we award the seats. So we have representation from North Lawndale and Austin and Gage Park. And so you can see in many ways, Burr Elementary is actually more diverse than the neighborhood that we sit in. And I say that because there's a lot, we have so much cultural and wealth in our school. We also have so many different experiences from within Chicago. And a story I like to tell to highlight this is there is an ice cream shop called Eli's Art, where you can get your ice cream turned into, I overheard some students talking about this. I've been there too, but you can go into this ice cream shop, and a student was talking about it, and I overheard this conversation, and they're like, they make your ice cream into unicorns and pandas or monkeys. And then my little sister loved it. This other student had a very different perspective, and he was like, oh, this neighborhood has gotten so bougie. And obviously we all are allowed to have our own preferences on how our ice cream is served to us. But if you peel back the layers of that, you really need to think about, how do you create a school culture where everybody feels like they belong? And then I think also, just as importantly, when they are having what feel like relatively benign conversations about their weekend and getting ice cream over the weekend, and they stumble into these different perspectives and life experiences, how can you make sure they have the skills to have those conversations in a safe and healthy way? And so that's kind of the school and the community and the diversity that we represent, and some of the challenges, which then brings me to some data about Burr Elementary. And this data is from the University of Chicago. And essentially it's like the pulse and temperature of the school. And so this data is specifically related to school connectedness. How connected do students feel to their school? You can see at Burr, the average for both subgroups that I've highlighted tonight is above the CPS average. However, our non-free and reduced lunch students and status, and then our free and reduced lunch students do have different school connectedness scores. And so different experience within the school. Emotional health, what's interesting about this data is that there is differences in 2019, but then after the pandemic in 2021, when they resumed taking the survey, they were kind of at like the same score. And so that's just a small snapshot of some of the things that I was looking at and considering as a school counselor. And then especially in addition to the pandemic and the mental health crisis that was happening even before the pandemic started, but then really kind of got bigger because of the pandemic, is how do you support students with all of these social, emotional health needs and learning? And so I kind of had this wondering, hey, how could comic writing support students with their social, emotional learning and health? And that includes friendship and sportsmanship, and includes students and their personal experience with the school. So, you know, kind of stepping out of like just their academics, how are they doing grade wise, but the things that make them comfortable or uncomfortable within the school building. And so these are my driving questions, my driving research questions. How does participation in a story writing elective change students' perception of their social emotional well-being? And then I have 3 primary sub-questions. If you give students an opportunity to write about their personal challenges, will they actually write about it? Will writing a story, will that change their sense of school connectedness and sense of belonging? And will it also change and influence their interpersonal problem solving skills? And so let's take a look at what I found. Well, first, talking about the intervention building blocks. So the 2 intervention building blocks that I built this comic writing elective off of was therapeutic writing. There was a school counselor in New York that did an action research project similar to the ones you're hearing right now and the ones you've heard. And he did his on a hip hop writing elective. And one of the things that he found was the hip hop elective had an impact with the students, but specifically the writing, the lyric component of it really gave students a chance to self-express their stories, their challenges, their hopes, and their dreams. And that was a very meaningful component of the entire elective. The other part was mentors and mentees. Younger students love to connect with older students. They look up to them. And then also mentors, older students do get a lot also out of working with younger students. And so those were the two foundational building blocks. So now you get to meet the two different cohorts that I studied. Here they are. You can see on the top, here's my in-school cohort. And then you can see on the bottom, there's my after-school cohort. You can see that there is a difference. You can see in the after-school cohort that there's not that second and third row of students. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the similarities, but also the differences between the cohort that caused for that shift and change in them. And so I first started with a one-to-one mentor to mentee model in my in-school cohort. That was 18, ended up being 18 middle school students and 19 second through fifth grade participants, mentees. So I want you to imagine a room where it's me, just me, and almost 40 children. And there was a lot of energy in the room, and that was definitely a positive. But because of some of the feedback I got from the students afterwards, specifically the second through fifth grade mentees, the participants, I ended up deciding to shift away from having a one-to-one mentor to mentee model. And that was because the younger students primarily said, I primarily used my mentor to help me with technology components and spelling. And there wasn't the same relationship building that I was hoping for. And they kind of spoke to that in the survey, and they said, I didn't really connect with my mentor, and sometimes I was uncomfortable. So I switched to a different model in the after school cohort. And I did a bad job of copy pasting on that when I edited something. And that should be 3 middle school mentors and 10 second through fifth grade mentees. And then the during the school model was from 3 to 3:35. So, and then we're on a block schedule. So it was A and B days. So it worked out to be 14 sessions over 5 weeks. And so again, I ended up switching to a different model because it was just so rushed, my time with the students to get them transitioned in, settled, to try to do a brainstorming activity in order to really focus them around the goals of the time was a little bit challenging. And so then I moved to this after school model from 3:45 to 4:45, where we did have adequate time to transition in, to do a mindfulness activity, and then also do some brainstorming before we dove into the writing. Ironically, the during school and after school time, the during school was 7 total hours and the after school was 6 hours. So about the same amount of time. Okay, findings for my sub-questions. First, when given the opportunity, will second through fifth grade students write stories about personal experiences and challenges? The overwhelming answer, yes, they did. And it included stories about feeling excluded from friendship activities and from during lunch and recess. It included homework, like overwhelming feelings around homework. It also included just having struggles with expression of self and feelings. And you can kind of see that here with the student. And then this is another graph that kind of highlights the themes that were overall present in my student stories. And friendship challenges above and beyond the number one thing that in both cohorts students wrote about. And then you can see school challenges was next, but there was some positives. Students surprised me a little bit, and they also just started writing about like friendship adventures and like, these are my friends and I want to celebrate them, and these are the fun things that we do together. Let's take a look at my next couple questions. And does it impact students' connectedness? Did it impact students' connectedness, and did it impact their interpersonal problem solving skills? And so for this question, what I did was I gave students a pre-survey and a post-survey with the same questions. And then here's, you're going to see each of the 3 questions, and the pre and post are going to come up. So first question, my class is a welcoming space for everybody. And the green, the darker green is strongly agree, the lighter green is agree, yellow is disagree, and then the red, not quite enough space to type that in there, was strongly disagree. And so you can see here that post-elective, that green bar just pushed up a lot, and then the amount of disagrees like went down. And so that created a place where students like average school connectedness score went up. People here notice when I'm good at something. This one stayed about the same. There wasn't major changes between the pre and post. But the last question, my classmates treat me with respect. And here, the green we can see went up, but also the amount of disagree went from the pre-test of 24% to 14%. And so as I averaged out those 3 different scores, you can see that there was an overall improvement in students' school connectedness score. And so I have that for each of the cohorts, and then the average between. And so there was small changes, but positive changes for school connectedness after participating in this comic writing elective. Now going to interpersonal problem solving skills. Same kind of method, pre and post test, 3 questions. I can often find ways to help others and arguments. And this one was interesting, kind of, going back to Elizabeth's point, their strongly disagree actually increased. But I do think that sometimes, because I've seen this before, is that sometimes when you talk to students about conflict resolution and communication styles and these interpersonal problem solving skills, sometimes they become more critical of their toolbox, and they're like, oh, well, maybe I'm not as good at that as I am. And they become, to Susan's point, more vulnerable and answer the question more harshly almost than they did in the pre. And so did see an increase in strongly disagree. Obviously, I think that if I could do this again, I would have teachers and parents maybe fill out a survey and then compare students' survey responses to their parents. Like, do the parents see an improvement? Do the teachers see an improvement in comparison to what the students feel about themselves? This question, I'm good at helping other people, stayed relatively the same. And then when I have a problem, I can find lots of ways to solve it. This one was interesting because there was nobody that strongly agreed with this question when they first took it in the pre, but then we had 19% of the overall participants were like, yeah, I can find ways to solve problems. But then we also had an increase in students that strongly disagreed with it. So, more exploration needs to be done, but those are some of the differences in the pre and post. And as we look at the overall averages, you can see that both cohorts started in about the same place, but then the after school cohort, their overall average of score increased, and the in-school cohort, their overall interpersonal problem solving skill that they self-rated, that the students self-rated, decreased. And some conclusions, I think that what I really learned as I went through this process was the importance of building relationships and really diving into those and finding ways to support students. I also learned the value of self-expression for students and the importance of adults giving students authentic feedback. And a story that I like to highlight this is that there was a student, very physically mature for a second grader. And so he often was getting in trouble at recess because he was just very physical in how he played. And so when we first started working with him, we were really like looking more at like the motor skills of it. But then once he wrote a story, and we were not making a dent, and we were not improving this, but once he wrote a story about it, it was interesting to hear it and see it from his perspective. And so first he writes about, I sometimes enjoy recess. Then he shows how this student tags him and that he calls it unfair. And then his emotions, well, then him falling, and then his emotions. And so from here, what I learned was that really he was having uncomfortable emotions during play, and some of them being anger and frustration. And then that turned into a big physical response. And so having him write this story and then approaching it from a different perspective, also being able to use some motivational interviewing techniques and have him work through the story, we saw a huge improvement in this student. And he actually, one of the students that he ended up often getting physical with, they ended up they stopped calling each other enemy. And they also started sitting together at lunch, which was after recess, and with no problems. And I'm like, what's going on? But I think that comes back to this was a really great opportunity. He loves art too, so he really loved writing the comic, building that relationship with him, giving him a chance to self-express his version of the story. And then I was able to give him more authentic feedback, still challenging, but more authentic because it was more relevant to his perspective. And so my policy recommendations are intervention autonomy. Since coming back from the pandemic, I have gotten like, use evidence-based, use evidence-based, use evidence-based. I don't disagree with using evidence-based, especially when it's a diagnosed mental health disorder like anxiety or depression, or some of the other ones that I'm currently working with. However, based on my action research, I also do think that there should be room for schools, school counselors, and teachers to use research informed. So kind of how I looked at the hip hop writing elective and some articles on mentorship. And I'm like, how can I use the best that's available and then make a culturally appropriate intervention that's within my skill set for my students? And so I think that we need to give rooms for schools to be responsive to their students' needs and to build interventions that they think will best support their students. The other thing too I really loved about this intervention was some of the evidence-based ones get really targeted, right? Like it is very specific what it's for, and they can be really time intensive. This intervention was all kinds of things showed up in it. And so it was pretty cool to be working with students on friendship and school overwhelm all in one place. And then also protect school counselors' use of time. This would not have been possible without my administration and all that they've done to remove non-counseling duties from my role over the last couple of years. But there are still school counselors that are very much struggling with these non-counseling tasks, and that includes testing coordination, being a prep teacher, which essentially means they go into the classroom so that the grade level teachers can get their prep, which is important, but like then the counselor has less time to move and meet students' needs. And so I think that increasing students' access to a school counselor in the way that the school counseling role should be utilized needs to be protected. And then I'm going to end on this thought, which is change the things that you cannot accept. So I get it, there are things that are out of my control, but at the same time, I can't accept that my students, especially my students of color, have a very different experience within our school community, the way that it is right now. And part of the reason I signed up for ARLI and continue to invest time into my counseling practices is I just can't accept that there are such different experiences for my students within our school community. And I want to keep working to make everybody's experience better and equitable. And with that, thank you so much for attending my presentation.
Wow, Carly, this feels really, really bittersweet because that was such a phenomenal final story to get to end on. And so we're gonna ask some really good questions and get a chance to hear and talk with you just a little bit more before we let go. Sarah has put our last feedback form of the evening into the chat. So please give Carly some kudos. Any thoughts, any questions that you have for her that you don't want to put into the full group. But I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to start with any questions that you have. So if I have anyone who'd like to share a question out, full group. And Carly, you are absolutely welcome to remain on your beautiful end screen, but if you do want to, you can as well.
Let's see.
Carly, I'd love it if you'd talk a little bit more, maybe a particular example of how you went from kid creating a story to an intervention that actually ended up being helpful. And I guess partly I'm also interested in, especially in kids that age, were they willing to let you use their vulnerabilities? I'm thinking of the kid on the playground kind of thing, to share in order to try to see if you could solve that problem. It sounds like it could be very delicate sometimes.
Yeah,
to thread that needle.
Yeah, that's such a great question. The students loved sharing their comics and they did not want to stop working on them. I actually had students that often, in each cohort, I had like 2 or 3 students that could not stop writing them. And I have students that wrote over 20 stories. Not all of them were like actual personal experiences, but they just kind of got lost in the world of story writing. But I also had lots of students that were like requesting, I want to share this with my friends, my class, and they did. And then it turned into really good, meaningful conversation. Actually, this student right here in particular, she really struggled with self-efficacy in the beginning of the year, and she would collect all these little things that happened and not feeling like she was being included in activities, and actually told by a friend like, well, I'm playing with her now, so you go over there until we're done playing. And obviously that is not good for a student's school connection and friendship experience, but she didn't have enough of a voice to overcome that. And so she wrote and which is part of the reason why I invited her to participate. I was like, let's see what happens when you write a story about it. And after that, she, by the time she wrote the story, she's like, I solved the problem. And then there was like another problem. And she's like, I got it, Miss Day. I can tell them that that's not the right kind thing to do. And so it really did. It started out as like a story elective. But then, especially with that shift to the after school, what I really appreciated about having the hour time block was we did a mindfulness intervention. I used Headspace, which has some really brilliantly like just beautiful mindful stories. And we followed the story of these like Star Wars characters as they have a challenge with their ship and something breaks down, and how they use breathing and positive affirmation. And so I built that in to like kind of model storytelling, the importance of talking about our challenges, and then also the importance of finding ways to solve that. And then we did a little bit of brainstorming about writing. And I think that helps students get focused on you can write whatever story you want, but during this time, while you have access to the counselor, if you can try to gear it towards a personal challenge, that way she can support you with it, kind of like really helped. And I was able to give more one-on-one feedback and more immediate feedback in that after school with less students and more time.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for giving us a little bit more insight there. We have a question from the audience about the demographics of your school, and I would add to that, can you tell us a little bit about how that reflected in the demographics of your groups, and any ways that you saw that impacted the experience of participants? Thank you. Unmute.
Sorry, I always mute so that there's not feedback. But yeah, I was worried about presenting the slide because it's a lot of data. But yeah, overall, my cohorts did pretty much represent the diversity within our school. And so I think that became, that was like a very positive place for students to, like, they saw, like, they had people that they connected with in presentation from the various grade levels. 5th was my lowest participation, and then really balanced on my gender, and then my racial demographics, like, also were very closely aligned to the school. And so pretty much like what their classroom looks like is what they were surrounded by in the elective.
Thank you. I'm going to open it up again for an audience member if anyone would like to share a question or comment out loud.
I have another question, is probably because I'm an sort of an ex-social worker, if that's all right, if nobody else is jumping in there, I guess. How did you handle it? It sounds like there weren't a lot of family related stories, but what kind of a challenge would that be if you had a story that told you something about something going on at home that really concerned you? What would be your next steps?
Yeah, I actually did have a story that I didn't post in here just because it was so.
Carly, you muted spontaneously.
That time I did, yeah, that time I didn't even press it. Okay, Zoom, gotta love Zoom. Yeah, that is such a great question. I obviously emphasized the friendship challenges and the homework challenges just because that was the bulk of the stories that were written. But I did have some students that wrote about home challenges, and one of them was a 3rd grader that just has been going through a lot this year. She just comes in kind of sad a lot to the school building. And we, as like the teachers, we had one meeting with the parents in October, and then things started kind of bubble up again. And what was really cool was she sometimes had a hard time vocalizing what was going on and like her concerns. But I remember one day I had lots of students, like, right, post-pandemic. I just feel like I wish there was at least one more of me, if not 3 or 4 school counselors in the building, and social workers. And I just had students pouring in all day. And then she's there in just tears. She had already participated in the elective, and I was like, I can talk to you in about half an hour. If I give you a computer, can you show me, write me a story about what's going on? And she just got to work. And then by the time I saw, there was some, she didn't write out the explicit language, but she did showcase that there was explicit language going on at home and how it made her feel. And then I ended up, I felt like it was safe enough to call parents and say, your kiddo is internalizing stuff that's going on at home, because it wasn't like an actual abuse situation. So thankfully that one like kind of was like a talking to the parents about like your kiddo is internalizing maybe some of the adult stuff they're hearing that's not directed to her. I don't know what I would do. I mean, I know what I would do if there was an abuse situation. I would, I'm a mandated reporter. That would be incredibly hard to see that in story, but if that was the outlet that the student needed to express it, then I would be thankful that they had that.
Okay.
I thought I saw one more hand before I asked my
had.
question.
I had seen Joy. I don't know if Joy's question was answered as Carly was sharing.
Okay, I am Joy, and I was trying to do the survey and thinking, oh, should I ask my question? I'm interested in the introduction that Carly gave to set the stage for the neighborhood and its economic differences. And I'm curious to know whether those issues played out in any way that students addressed, or that your own insights as a member of a faculty might have been able to create an interest in supporting that environment where students are truly very diverse in a lot of different ways. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
Yeah.
I work in economic education, and you're bringing up issues that are extremely personal and lived experiences of children, and it's not, and it's very interesting to me what you've been reporting.
Yeah, that's a really great question, because those kind of stories, like I remember right before the pandemic, there was another story. This was math class, and there was a story about car interest. Somebody bought a car, they put some money down, they were paying off the rest with interest. And one student was one of our more affluent students, was like, why wouldn't they just buy it outright, right? Because then you're not spending all that money on interest. And then other students like, well, that's what rich people do. And so we stumble across these various perspectives all the time. And, I think about my experience, like, I mean, I was in a rather homogeneous community growing up. And so I'm like, I don't know that I was challenged with that level of diversity and perspective when I was a teenager, let alone a second, third, or fourth grader. And so, I think equipping students with perspective taking skills is really important, and then how to have those conversations in a non-judgmental way. So I think that kind of answers your questions. I didn't see any of that directly in the stories that my students wrote, but I did see a lot of like friendship conflict, which then in the back of my head, I'm like, how much of that is requires, like, how much of that conflict would be solved by perspective taking, understanding the friendship dynamics and the diversity like within our school. And so, yeah, I think that answers your question, Joy.
Yes, it does. And it gives me a lot to think about. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no worries.
All right, I do want to give time for one more question, and I see that I have a hand up from Loretta Walton. But before I turn it over to Loretta, I do just want to highlight one more time that in the Zoom chat, you can access the feedback form link. It's the same link for all presenters. So if you click it and bookmark it, you'll be able to come back to it for all three of our phenomenal presenters from this evening. And if you still have any presentations you want to provide feedback to from last Thursday, you also can use that feedback form there. So as people are finishing up, if you have a feedback form that you'd like to complete before you hop off of Zoom tonight, I'm going to turn it over to Loretta for our final question or comment of the evening.
I just was noticing your chart and I noticed that you only had one teacher and after, is there some reason why it was only one teacher and you had so many during the day?
Oh, yeah, that's a really great question. So that's like referrals. So there wasn't any teachers actually present, but referrals. And so I think what happened in the in-school one was that because like what happened first was the middle school teachers would say this many middle school students were interested in being mentors for your elective. So when I did this and I was like, I have 19 middle school mentors, I like emailed the teachers and I was like, I have 19 middle schoolers who during that like time, because it's called what I need time. So I'm like, who would benefit from a creative outlet? Who do you think I need to get to know better as a counselor? Who do you think I need to observe and experience what you're experiencing in the classroom? And so because I had such a high threshold of student spots I needed to fill to make sure each middle school participant had a younger student. I think that's why you see so many teacher referrals. Also, the after school one was so late in the school year. That one didn't start until April. And so right after spring break. And so at this point, I'm like, man, who are those students that need support before we go into the summer? And so, and students that were just talking to me like, Miss Day, what opportunity do you have for me to like, see you more and like talk to you more? And so that's, I think, partially why we see differences in the number of teacher referrals.
Thank you.
Okay, let's give Carly another round of applause. And then let's open it up. And Carly, if you can unshare at this point so we can see everybody in the space, we want to give another like thunderous round of applause to Carly, to Elizabeth, to Daniela from tonight, from last Thursday, we have Tarsia, we have Leah, we have Liz, we have Jennifer. These presentations blew me away. I'm so honored that I had an opportunity to hear and participate again. I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah for any final notes.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you so much for emceeing both tonight and last Thursday. It was such a pleasure to have you. You are very, very adept at this. So thank you for joining us. And thank all of you for joining us this evening. And congratulations again, as Kate said, to all 7 of our ARLI presenters who I feel fearlessly shared their work with us tonight and last Thursday. Again, just sort of the 80th reminder to complete a feedback form for each presenter. This feedback is incredibly important and I think valuable and just makes them feel, as supported as they should. So if you haven't already done that, please complete a form for each presenter that you saw and you experienced. I've again popped the link in the chat and I'll keep that form live through tomorrow. So you have plenty of time to complete those. So Deb, we are so grateful for your guidance and your support throughout the ARLI program cycle. Thank you so much for leading this year's wonderful cohort. It's been a pleasure. And finally, without getting emotional, as CFE winds down operations over the next couple of months, I really hope you won't be a stranger. Please feel free, as always, to reach out to me with any questions or comments or stories you have. I really, really do love hearing from our community, and I will be around for the next few months anyway. So please do reach out, even if it's just to say hello. So thank you all again, and I hope you have wonderful evenings. Take care.